Hello everyone, welcome to Total Gyan, your ultimate destination for knowledge and learning. I am Samarth, your host and guide on this journey through fascinating facts and insights. Imagine a world divided not just by borders, but by ideologies that shaped the course of history. Welcome to our series on the Cold War, a period of tension, rivalry, and nuclear brinkmanship between the United States and the Soviet Union. In this episode, we'll journey back to the origins of this conflict, exploring the events and decisions that set the stage for a decades long standoff that would define the 20th century. Join us as we uncover the untold stories and surprising twists in this series of the Cold War.
Style.
Now, let me tell you about origins of the Cold War and key events. First one is Yalta Conference, which was held on February 1945. At the Yalta Conference, held before the end of World War II, the leaders of the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom met to discuss the post-war reorganization of Europe. While there was initial cooperation, disagreements soon arose over the future of Eastern Europe. Now, the second one was division of Germany. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, it was divided into four zones of occupation, controlled by the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and France. The Soviet Union began to establish communist governments in its zone, which concerned the Western Allies. Next, the third one was Iron Curtain speech of March 1946. In a speech at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill famously declared that an Iron Curtain had descended across Europe, separating the communist East from the capitalist West. Next, a big key event was the Long Telegram of February 1946. George F. Kennan, an American diplomat stationed in Moscow, sent a telegram to the State Department outlining his views on the Soviet Union's expansionist tendencies. This telegram, known as the Long Telegram, became a foundational document of the US policy of containment. Another key event was the Truman Doctrine in March 1947. In response to communist threats in Greece and Turkey, President Harry Truman announced the Truman Doctrine, which pledged to provide military and economic aid to countries threatened by communism. This marked a significant shift in US foreign policy towards containment. The next was the Marshall Plan from 1948 to 1952. The United States implemented the Marshall Plan, a massive economic aid program to help rebuild Western Europe, economies devastated by World War II. The plan was also intended to prevent the spread of communism by promoting economic stability and prosperity. These events set the stage for the Cold War, a period of ideological, political, and military tension between the Western Bloc, led by the United States and its NATO allies, and the Eastern Bloc, led by Soviet Union and its Warsaw Pact allies, which lasted until the collapse of Soviet Union in 1991. The events mentioned are not just origins of the Cold War. They represent some of the key early developments in the Cold War. The origins of the Cold War can be traced back to the immediate post-World War II period, as tensions between United States, the Soviet Union began to emerge due to ideological differences, wartime mistrust, and conflicting national interests. The events mentioned earlier, such as Truman Doctrine, Marshall Plan, Berlin Blockade, and formation of NATO, were pivotal moments that intensified these tensions and marked the beginning of the Cold War's most active phase. A crisis which put an impact on early Cold War is the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis, which occurred in October 1962, was a 13-day confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union over the presence of Soviet nuclear-armed missiles in Cuba. Here is an overview of the crisis. In the early 1960s, the United States had attempted to overthrow the Cuban government led by Fidel Castro in the Bay of Pigs invasion 1961. To protect Cuba from further US aggression and to gain a strategic advantage in Cold War, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev agreed to secretly place nuclear missiles in Cuba. On October 14, 1962, US reconnaissance flights discovered Soviet missile sites under construction in Cuba. President John F. Kennedy was briefed on the situation and faced with the choice of how to respond to this threat. Kennedy and his advisors debated various courses of action, including a military strike on Cuba or a naval blockade to prevent further missile shipments. On October 22, Kennedy announced a naval blockade termed as quarantine to prevent Soviet ships from reaching Cuba. Tensions escalated as Soviet ships approached the quarantine line and the world braced for a potential nuclear conflict. Behind the scenes, negotiations were ongoing between US and the Soviet Union to find a peaceful resolution. On October 28, Khrushchev announced that the Soviet Union would dismantle the missile sites in Cuba in exchange for a US pledge not to invade Cuba and a secret agreement to remove US missiles from Turkey. The crisis was averted and both sides stepped back from the brink of a nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis is regarded as the closest the world has come to nuclear war. It led to improved communication between the US and the Soviet Union as both sides realized the need to avoid such dangerous confrontations in the future. The crisis also highlighted the importance of diplomacy and negotiation in resolving conflicts. The Cold War had significant cultural impacts influencing art, literature, music, and entertainment. Here is a brief overview. Both the United States and the Soviet Union used cultural propaganda to promote their ideologies. This included literature, films, and the art that portrayed their respective societies in the positive light and criticized the other side. The Cold War spy genre became popular in literature and film, with the stories often featuring espionage, intrigue, and the conflict between the East and West. The fear of nuclear war permeated popular culture, influencing films, books, and music that reflected concerns about the consequences of nuclear conflict. The Cold War era saw the rise of youth culture with the emergence of rock and roll music, rebellious fashion trends, and the sense of generational identity that challenged traditional norms. Sports became a battleground for Cold War competition, particularly in events like the Olympics, where the athletes from the US and Soviet Union competed for ideological superiority. These cultural aspects of the Cold War era reflected the border tensions and ideologies of the time, shaping the cultural landscape of the 20th century. So friends, this was the end of episode 1. Be waiting and curious for episode 2. Subscribe our channels, share this video with your friends, and write a comment below. Thanks for watching.